Welcome to the University of Pittsburgh's Health and Explainable AI podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Gass-Poore, a health and science reporter. Join me as we cover advancements being made in health informatics and explainable AI for students, researchers, and healthcare practitioners interested in applications of artificial intelligence and machine learning. This podcast is produced by the University of Pittsburgh's Health and Explainable AI Research Laboratory at the University of Pittsburgh School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences Department of Health Information Management. Headed by Ahmad Tafti, Pitt's HexAI Lab cultivates extramural collaborations with academic institutions both nationally and internationally through its research, educational contributions, and this podcast series. Hello and welcome back to Pitt HexAI, a podcast series produced by the University of Pittsburgh's Health and Explainable AI Research Laboratory. I'm Jordan Gass-Poore, your host, and today we're going to speak with Dr. William Hersh, a professor in the Department of Medical Informatics and Clinical Epidemiology in the School of Medicine at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland. Welcome, Bill. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. We're looking forward to learning about your work around AI education and hearing about a presentation that you recently gave on artificial intelligence and the implications for health professions education at the 2023 KHAM Summit. To get us started, would you like to introduce yourself and share for us what got you interested in the fields of health informatics, artificial intelligence, and education?
Yes, I was introduced to computers at a somewhat early age. I was in high school in the early 1970s, and my high school acquired a desktop computer, which very primitive by today's standards. It was about the size of a suitcase. It had a keyboard, a one-line LED display, and a cassette for mass storage. But that was my introduction, and I was very intrigued by it. I even went off to college. I grew up in the Chicago area, went off to the University of Illinois, and actually started in computer science. But when I got into college, computer science just wasn't that interesting to me. So I ended up becoming a pre-med and going to medical school. I'd always been interested in health. And so I went off to medical school, also at University of Illinois in the Chicago area. And towards the end of medical school, now into the 1980s, was the early days of PCs and Macs and dial-up bulletin boards and things like that. And so I was drawn back into it. And by the end of my medical training, I did a residency in internal medicine. I was spending a lot of my time playing with computers, and then someone told me, you should look into this field called informatics. And there was no Google or anything to go type informatics into. So I actually had to write letters and call people on the phone. But I was able to find out that you can actually do a postdoctoral fellowship in what we tended to call it back then, medical informatics. And I did that. And I went off to Boston at one of the Harvard teaching hospitals, Brigham and Women's, and did a fellowship in informatics. And that's what really cemented my interest and my love for the field. It really was a way to combine my passion and enjoyment of computers, but also maintaining my connection to medicine. And towards the end of the fellowship, I was looking for a job, and I ended up here at Oregon Health and Science University. I came in as an assistant professor, and the program was just getting started then, and sort of the rest is history.
Before we dive into your work, I understand that you frequently get asked, what's biomedical and health informatics? For our listeners, I'd be curious to hear how you commonly answer the question.
I used to get asked that question a lot more. I remember my grandmother asking me that question, and she said, you're still going to be a doctor, aren't you? And I said, yes, I'm still working in medicine. And, I like to define, and I use the kind of overarching term biomedical and health informatics, although there's so many variations of it, biomedical informatics, clinical informatics, health informatics. I think they're all relatively the same thing, maybe with a slightly different subject focus. But it's basically the use of, we used to say the use of information to improve things related to health. Now we might say the use of data and information to improve health, healthcare, public health, research, things like that. And really the focus is on the information more so than the technology. I mean, those of us who work in informatics love technology, have to get the new laptop, phone, whatever. But at the end of the day, At its best, biomedical and health informatics is really about making people's lives better, particularly related to their health and their medical care. So, because I used to get asked that question a lot, I stood up a website. And actually, a few years ago, when .health became a top level domain, I managed to snag the informatics.health domain. So, if you type informatics.health into your browser, it actually redirects to a site here at OHSU. And what I do is I pull some of the very introductory lectures from my introductory course. I provide links out to some of the key papers, some of the key organizations like the National Library of Medicine, the American Medical Informatics Association, and some of the related professional associations that are more focused on other things. So I provide that for people who wish to know more about biomedical and health informatics.
How is AI changing health informatics and healthcare? I'm thinking about education. How are new AI technologies introducing challenges for educators and future health professionals?
Well, I actually view AI as really part of the larger field of biomedical and health informatics. It's another tool, and obviously, it's become a big part. And obviously, it goes beyond biomedical and health informatics. It's impacting not only all of healthcare, but all of society. But, clearly we are seeing the successful development, initially more of the predictive AI. So things like classification, like image classification, predicting patients deteriorating, predicting patient outcomes, things like that. And then of course we have, it's amazing to think it's less than a year ago, the introduction of generative AI, which produces output like text or images. And of course, generative AI has been around for a while, but certainly the big splash was last November 30th, 2022, when ChatGPT was released. Like many people, I knew what GPT was. I kind of followed that work, but clearly ChatGPT brought it to a new level. So now we have this new type of generative AI that you can talk to, interact with, generate information for yourself, if you're a clinician, for your patients, if you're a teacher, for your students, and so forth. Now, that said, we can't forget about predictive AI. It's still important. We still need to continue developing image classification, other kinds of predictive systems. So all of that is part of AI, and we shouldn't just focus on one part of it.
Touching on generative AI and work that's needed right now to advance the development of applications that healthcare professionals and educators can interact with, what are some crucially important things that university research labs can be focusing on doing, like developing training data sets, and what sorts of concerns should we keep in mind?
Sure. Yeah, data sets are very important. And it's critically important that we have good data sets, that we have high fidelity data sets, that we have data sets that don't reflect bias that may be present in the people who collect the data sets or larger society. There's plenty of examples. Most people who follow AI know of algorithms that make recommendations based on data that may not really be reflective of the real world or may have biases in it. And so that's really important. And then we have to have access to the tools. And this actually brings up another concern, is that especially the large language models take massive amounts of resources to develop that most universities don't have. And in fact, really the main people who have them are the large technology companies. And, so far they've been pretty good about it. But, there is a concern of the models all being controlled by companies who sometimes their interests may kind of diverge from the common good. So we need to keep those things in mind as these large language models and other tools are rolled out.
You've cautioned that healthcare professionals should be competent in uses and limitations of AI applications. Would you like to elaborate on this for us?
Sure. AI it's really important for those who are going to use AI to understand it, to understand how it works, to understand what it's trying to do, what its limitations are, how successful it's been. And so really everyone who's going to work in healthcare or probably any knowledge-based kind of field, not just healthcare, really needs to understand the big picture of AI and down somewhat into these systems. Now, I'm moderately well trained in areas like computer science, but I can open a real technical textbook or paper on AI and just get overwhelmed by the equations, the technical jargon, and so forth. And I don't think healthcare professionals need that level of knowledge, but they need to understand, what is AI trying to do? This is a model that's trying to classify chest x-ray images into diagnoses. And maybe even a little bit about how it works. It works by supervised learning, and there's a data set that it was trained on, and that data set may not be complete, and some of the labels in the data set may be inaccurate. Things at that level. In some sense, this goes back to work that I started doing about 10 years ago with teaching medical students and other health profession students around competencies in clinical informatics. And really, it was the same point. A physician or nurse or whoever doesn't need to be a computer programmer. They don't need to look under the hood at the code. But every healthcare professional needs to understand how to operate an electronic health record, the issues about getting data in, getting data out, what the limitations are, how the data might be shared with the health system down the street that uses a different vendor for things like health information exchange, issues around privacy and security, professionalism, especially on social media, all those kinds of things. And I, again, published a paper about 10 years ago looking at competencies in clinical informatics. Interestingly enough, we didn't say anything at that point about machine learning or AI, but we've had a chance to update those competencies. And machine learning and AI are in there now. It's another informatics related competency that health professionals may have. And this even extends to health informatics professionals. Again, not all of them are necessarily in the weeds, technical and programming and things like that, but they may be implementing systems in complex healthcare organizations and issues around policy and governance and things like that. So everyone has to have that basic understanding of what machine learning does and AI does to be able to use those systems, whether they're a practitioner or they're an informatics professional implementing a system and so forth. And so I view AI as another one of the competencies. Now, there actually have been, and I talked about this in my recent talk that you mentioned, there actually have been some competency sets developed around AI specifically, and they delve further into AI. And I think these papers are good because there are many issues related to AI that healthcare professionals and health informatics professionals must know. So, again, in summary, everyone needs to know enough about AI to use it effectively, whether they're a clinician or an informatician, and to be able to evaluate it. But again, not necessarily to know all the details under the hood.
What AI related competencies would you say are most important for health profession learners to acquire?
Well, there are certainly a number of people, the people developing these systems, developing the AI models, they need to understand those differential equations and all that. But again, the healthcare professionals and even the kind of applied informatics professionals, again, don't necessarily need to know all the math, but certainly have to have a good understanding of how these systems work, issues around the data that goes into them, issues around bias, and not only in the data, but also in the algorithms, being able to critically appraise studies like clinical trials of AI interventions and being able to decide, is that AI tool right for the kinds of patients that I see and so forth. And I would say our program at OHSU like most other academic medical centers that have strong informatics programs, like the University of Pittsburgh as well, there are some people that are working kind of in the basic science of AI and informatics, and then more in the kind of translational picture of it moving into the clinical science and out into the community. I mean, in some ways, it's like developing drugs or medical devices. There are the basic scientists who work in the lab. We often say at the bench. They do experiments with tissue cultures, animals, engineering devices, things like that. They're mostly PhDs. And then when the things they've developed get good enough and promising enough, are handed off, and then they collaborate with the clinical people, and then moving into things like implementing in the real world and doing clinical trials and things like that.
For educators who are soon going to be surrounded by AI-powered teaching tools, how should educators approach adapting to the future?
I think that there will be many educational applications that use AI, and some of those, in some ways it's like AI's impact in medicine. Most physicians in the future will start to use AI tools more and more in their practice of medicine. Likewise, many educators will start to use AI tools more in their educational practice. Just as I don't see in the foreseeable future AI replacing physicians, I also don't see AI replacing good teachers. I see good teachers making use of AI tools. I, like many educators, have started to explore how I might use ChatGPT in the teaching that I do, giving students assignments to, craft things with ChatGPT, critically appraise it, what's missing from it, and so forth. And so those sorts of things. And, I often allude to the fact that I was a very early adopter of educational technology. I started teaching online really around the turn of the century, 1999, and started preparing lectures that way. And it got to the point where I have not stood up in front of a classroom and given a lecture. Now, I still stand up in front of classrooms and interact with students, but to me, it doesn't make any sense if I have a 1 hour lecture on supervised learning. There's no reason for me to just stand up and recite that. I can record it, and probably the quality is actually going to be a little bit better. And I have my slides and everything. And then the students can listen to that, and then they can come to class and we can talk about things. Or maybe in the future, they'll run my lecture or my slides through ChatGPT or whatever. But there will still be that interaction. And I think there will still be the human need to really pick out the important points. What's important here? What are some of the controversies? And having discussions about them, and so forth. So again, like medicine, AI tools will come into education, but the better educators will figure out the best ways to use them.
You just published a new book, A Practical Guide on Health Informatics. What does the book cover, and what do you ultimately hope readers will take away from it?
My book is a textbook it's called Health Informatics Practical Guide. I actually chose that name because this is actually the 8th edition of the book, and a colleague of mine was the previous editor, although I was co-editor with him in the 6th and 7th editions. It's a textbook for the informatics field. It's an edited book. I actually wrote about a third of the chapters, but I asked colleagues to write various other ones. And it covers, to me, what are the important topics, the important introductory topics that people studying informatics need to know about, whether they're a student in another field who's taking an informatics course, maybe as an elective, or the introductory course that, for example, students in our graduate program take. And the book has chapters on many of the major areas in health informatics, electronic health records, clinical decision support, data standards and interoperability, search systems, some of the other flavors of informatics, imaging informatics, public health informatics. And there is a chapter on machine learning and AI. Now, the book was published last summer, a little over a year ago. So there's nothing in there on large language models. There's a fair amount on predictive AI and what had been done. And it points to some of the challenges we have with textbooks, or books in general, is that new things come along. I'm, trying to figure out what to do because the AI chapter is somewhat out of date now. It's a year old. But, some of the other chapters on things like electronic health records or search systems are not that much has changed in the last year that puts the whole chapter out of date, like the AI chapter is. So one thing I may actually do is just write a new AI chapter, maybe put it on the website. There is a website for the book, another domain name that I managed to snag. It's there. If you go to informaticsbook.info is the website, and it tells you about the book and how to get it and so forth. And there's some sample chapters and things like that. And if I do write a new chapter on AI, I'll probably just post it up there. But it's really meant to be a textbook to introduce people to the field.
Changing subjects. Thinking about advancements in AI, what are you excited about that you're following? And what are you excited about relative to your teaching work?
Well, one of the ways I would describe myself is as an informatics generalist. I mean, I do have some expertise in the field of information retrieval, which is where I did my research. But one of the things I've really enjoyed about teaching an introductory course is that it gives me the incentive, the motivation to keep up on the entire field. And I actually enjoy having that motivation. I enjoy learning new things. I mean, AI is the hot topic now, but there's interesting things about telehealth, about patient safety and quality, things like that we can't forget about, because AI is the big shiny thing right now, but there are other areas as well. So because I actually teach this introductory course in a variety of formats, and that's another value to online teaching. The main course is in our graduate program, so our students who start our master's or PhD program take that course initially. But I also teach the course as a standalone continuing education course in partnership with the American Medical Informatics Association. We call it 10 by 10, kind of dating back to aiming to train 10,000 people in informatics by the year 2010, which we didn't do, but 10 by 10 gives it a kind of snazzy name. I've also repackaged that course as a medical student elective, and medical students tend to take courses in blocks rather than 3 or 4 courses at the same time. So I've been able to repackage it, but the upshot of all that is, because I teach this course in so many different ways, is that it does give me the opportunity to devote a lot of time to it. And so that then gives me the time to keep up with everything that's new. And of course, one of the challenges in AI is that there's literally new things every day. I have a number of sources. I follow a few key people on Twitter, for example, Eric Topol. I'm a big fan of his. He's constantly, this paper was published today, and literally when I'm giving another version of that talk I gave at the KHIM Summit here at OHSU in a few weeks, and I mean already there's new papers that I want to reference in the talk because they're interesting and they add to the discussion. So if you're really committed to teaching, you have to keep up in your field, which I do, and I'm grateful that I actually have the opportunity to do that.
On this podcast, we like to focus on explainable AI. What's your take on explainability? And how should educators approach teaching explainability in your view?
I think explainability is important. I mean, if you want, clinicians who may be making significant decisions, even potentially life and death decisions, and some AI system is telling them to do this or prescribe that, you want to have some kind of explainability, some kind of way of telling you why the system thinks you should do that instead of saying just do that. So I think explainability is important. I have somewhat followed that area of the literature. I don't consider myself to be an expert in it, and I know that it's been a challenging area to develop, but I think we need to do it because we need AI that we can trust, just like we need other applications. This is maybe a little bit of a tangent, but I have chatted with physicians who tell me they don't trust medical records anymore because they know that people are copying and pasting or that the information may not all be there. So we need to have trust in the information systems that we use in every area, in the news that we read and everything, but certainly in medicine, there needs to be trust. We need to look at the ethical issues, things we've already talked about, like data bias, algorithm bias. All of those are critically important if we really want to see AI advance and achieve its potential in medicine.
Switching subjects again and returning to your book, you mentioned electronic health records and information sharing systems. How do you see the future of electronic health records and information collection?
It's funny because 20 years ago we were talking about we need to move medicine and healthcare off of paper to medical records. I can remember in the early part of my career I actually did some clinical work as a general internal medicine physician. And for example, when I was on call and not in the hospital, and a patient was referred to me, there's no way that I could get any information about the patient other than what they told me. Now, of course, at most medical centers, certainly most academic medical centers, the clinician just pops open their laptop, connects to the electronic health record, can get the history and past problems and medications that they're on and so forth. So that's an advance. Now, we've also had challenges with electronic health records. You probably have read some about physician burnout and physicians being frustrated at how long it takes to enter information. So there will hopefully be ways that AI can help that. And one of the big promises, it's still early days, but are the things like ambient documentation, where basically the system listens in on the conversation between the physician and the patient and essentially generates a clinical note, the documentation. And so it saves time for physicians. Physicians don't like to type a lot into computers. A lot of people don't like to type a lot into computers. And so, AI may be helpful in, we think of the sexy applications of AI, answering our questions and diagnosing x-rays, but maybe some of those more mundane applications like helping physicians, nurses, and others be more efficient in their work may be a critically beneficial application. So we'll see what happens there. Some people are concerned about the computer in the exam room with the patient because a lot of people go to the doctor now, and the doctor, if it's done poorly, has his or her back to the patient typing away. And so some people say, well, we should get computers out of the exam room. I actually would like to see us getting keyboards out of the exam room. So we still have the computer there, but the doctor's not focused on the keyboard trying to enter all this data. Actually last year I had a knee injury, and the physical therapist, I felt like she was really good when she finally paid attention to me, but she was entering all these measurements she did of me. And I guess, she needed to enter that data, but maybe in the future, I don't know, the instruments, when she measures the angle that my knee can go to, that instrument might have, some kind of, Bluetooth that puts the measurement into the computer so she doesn't have to type it, but we'll see. So, we need to move medical documentation to electronic format, and we pretty much have, but now we need to streamline the whole data entry process, and there are probably roles for AI there.
Your answer made me think of what it would be like to have something like Alexa in the doctor's office, and how collecting information through a conversation with a device might differ from speaking with a trained physician. These conversations might turn into a whole other electronic health record.
That, though, raises some other issues. For example, the notion of protected health information, the HIPAA laws. How do we maintain patient privacy? Do we want patient data going into, well, especially large language models? I mean, there are other models that are much more kind of protected, where patient data does go into those models, but the models are on smaller servers in medical centers. But when you have large language models, that only these big tech companies can do, we want to be careful about what kind of personal information of any of us goes into those models.
Before we close, we like to ask all of our guests to offer students a research project idea. What's something that you'd love to see students work on?
It might be challenging for a student because when you do things like clinical trials, you have to involve a lot of people. But I think the big opportunity in AI is implementing it in real clinical settings and then evaluating it. And, we talk about building the evidence base for how well AI interventions work. So I think for students spearheading or being involved with clinical trials, looking at how AI is implemented. And again, you don't necessarily need to be the programmer, but you have to understand why the AI is being used, how it works. Then you also have to understand study design, how you can actually measure whether or not the system leads to improvement. And so I think those are big opportunities for students. Or you also mentioned explainable AI, implementing that in the real world. How do physicians react to an AI system that's telling them to do something and actually trying to explain to them why it thinks they should be doing what the system is recommended. So I think there's a lot of, maybe you could call them downstream AI applications, beyond the models. If you search the PubMed database of the medical literature, there's thousands and thousands now of papers published about AI models. But there's only, depending on how you count them, less, around 100 clinical trials that have been done, which may seem like a lot, but on the other hand, it's trivial compared to all the different types of applications and all the different model papers that have been published.
Would you like to close the interview with any news or shout outs for our listeners? Are you working on any new books or projects?
Well, at some point, I'll need to update that textbook. I do have the opportunity to be involved in a number of projects that I can mention, most of which are funded by the National Institutes of Health, which is the main funder of research in the United States. One of the projects I'm involved with is called Bridge to AI, which is looking at building high quality, but also ethically sourced data sets that then AI researchers can use to build better models and again, hopefully lead to that downstream use. Another project I'm involved with is also from the NIH called the Data Science Initiative for Africa, looking at building capacity, not only people capacity, but data capacity in Africa. And the conditions are right for it. The internet is now fairly robust, certainly the cell phone infrastructure in Africa. And there's a lot of opportunities to advance health and healthcare in Africa. And it's a consortium. I'm actually next month going to Kigali, Rwanda, for the annual meeting of the consortium. And I'm involved in a number of sub projects within the consortium. Another grant I have from the National Library of Medicine at University of Pittsburgh also has one of them, is a grant for summer internships for college students and others, particularly those from historically underrepresented backgrounds, aiming to bring more people into the field, improve diversity and inclusion in the field. And so we just had a nice cohort of summer interns here, and we'll do it again next summer. So those are the kinds of projects that excite me, to look at ways to really contribute specific things, give people new skills, new tools, and so forth, so they can do this kind of work as well. Another shout out is developing new kinds of courses and new ways of teaching and some of the tools that are being developed. And another area that's kind of interesting and intriguing to me is what some people call no code or visual programming tools. And I give an example. It's not the only one, but it's our open source system with a large following, the Orange data mining system that enables people to build machine learning models and evaluate them without actually having to program. The system, it uses a kind of visual programming paradigm where people drag things onto a canvas and connect them. And it works quite effectively. There's a lot of great online videos teaching how to use it and so forth.
What's your take on no code or low code tools? Is it up to educators to introduce students to these new tools and ways of working with data and coding applications?
Yeah. Well, one of the questions that always comes up, especially in the informatics field, is, should physicians and other healthcare professionals code? And, a lot of them like to do it. I mean, I like to do it. I don't do that much of it. But the challenge is that there are people who do coding as a profession, and at least with compared to physicians, that they're cheaper. So, some of these no code tools will give physicians and other healthcare professionals, the ability to kind of build models and test them. And then maybe the programmers will take them and, code them in Python and, make them much more robust. It's certainly a great way to learn about machine learning. You can, I was amazed the first time that I built a neural network model. I suppose I could have found a code library and done it in Python, but, I just dragged the data in and connected it to the model, and I was able to test it and see what parameters work better and so forth. So I think the no code tools are a great way to learn. And then the people that really need to do the real high end, really deep kind of things and totally reliable algorithms and so forth will probably need to stick, to do the actual coding in languages like Python or R.
Touching on the future of education some more, how do you feel about digital notebooks like Jupyter Notebooks and Google Colab Notebooks and their use as teaching interfaces? Are students interacting around notebooks the future of education?
Yeah, I think so. Again, I know from my own experience, of course, coding's gotten a lot different now. There's a lot of tools, everything from version management to debuggers and things like that, that were not nearly as developed when I was in my training. And, I could spend a day sometimes trying to track down a bug in a program I was trying to write, and I couldn't get it to work. And, it's probably not necessary for people who are not going to be coders to have to go through that sort of experience. And, of course, then there's the whole issue of things like ChatGPT writing code, which is also going to change the coding profession. So, I think tools like the computational notebooks, like the no code programming environments are certainly great for teaching. And, we may find that they have just as much value in actually implementing systems. When I was in my medical informatics fellowship, I took a course in assembly language programming. I'm not aware of anyone who programs in assembly language. I mean, maybe some people who do some of the real kind of things right at the level of the hardware, but people don't really need to learn assembly language anymore. Again, unless maybe you're a computer science major and need to kind of understand how the machine works. So I think these other tools will make the methods and the models a lot more accessible without having to, deal with all the coding.
Bill, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's been real enjoyable for me. These are topics I'm very passionate about, and it's great to get to talk about them.
Thanks everyone for tuning in and for following the show. The Health and Explainable AI podcast is produced by the University of Pittsburgh's Health and Explainable AI Research Laboratory at University of Pittsburgh School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences Department of Health Information Management. I'm Jordan Gass-Poore. Thanks for listening.